Lying is a conscious distortion of the truth. Denial is a process in which we deceive ourselves. That's the difference between lying and denial. Lying is conscious, denial is we're even fooled ourselves. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry, I could not travel both. Those words may sound familiar to you. The words of Robert Frost's poetry are arguably some of the most famous words in the 20th century American poetry. They can be found in everything from gift cards and motivational posters to car commercials and coffee mugs. Most people see the poem as a tribute to individuality. It's about the freedom to choose whatever works for us. People point to the idea of the road less traveled to help explain to their kids why it's important to embrace their differences, to not follow the herd. It's perceived as a triumph of uniqueness. Bless you. I looked down one as far as I could, then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though, as for that, the passing there had worn them really about the same. If you look a little closer at the words of the poem, you'll realize something. You'll realize that the narrator doesn't actually take the road less traveled. He observes that both paths had worn really about the same. They were equally traveled. And both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day. Yet, knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted that I should ever come back. It's not until the end that we even hear the words, the road less traveled. At the end, the narrator says, I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in wood, and I took the road less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Sound familiar? Yes? No? Yeah. Good. Whew. David Orr, the columnist for the New York Times and a professor of poetry at Cornell University, explains the poem. He says that the speaker will be claiming ages and ages hence. His claim is that the decision made all the difference. But it's only because it's that kind of claim that we want to make when we want to comfort or blame ourselves for how our lives turned out. Or continues on to say, the poem isn't a salute to can-do individualism. It's a commentary. It's a commentary on the self-deception we practice when constructing the story of our lives. The poem's not about how brilliant choices led to great things in our lives. It's not about rugged individualism. It's about denial. The poem holds a mirror to us and shows us that we create our narrative to justify our behavior. We come here tonight to undo that self-deception. We come here at the beginning of the high holidays to welcome the new year and engage in that tricky Hebrew word, teshuvah. When we try to translate in English, teshuvah, you've also often heard, means repent or atone. But there's another word for that translation. Lashuv means to return. And so teshuvah is a process of returning. During this time of introspection, we return. We turn away from those less important things that occupy our time over the year. We return to ourselves, to our core. Tonight, we turn inward. We engage in reflection, and we wonder if we're living up to our potential. Oh, we have sinned against you before this, and we have sinned against you with that. We have sinned against you with yada yada, and we have sinned against you with blah blah blah. We do that. We do teshuvah. We atone. But in order to do so, we have to understand why we have the commandments in the first place. Why are we given these things if we so often fail? According to a 19th century rabbi, Aaron Shmuel Tamaris, there are two possible reasons we have the commandments, the mitzvot. The first possible reason is that they are a sign of subservience. They're like a tax for being alive. God created us, and as a thank you, we have to do God's bidding while we're alive. It's a quid pro quo. If that's so, if we're given the commandments as a tax from God, then the process of asking for forgiveness is all about avoiding punishment. We want to make sure we pay our taxes, or else we end up in prison. Nobody wants to end up in prison. Right? Okay. Just checking. There's some support to this idea of punishment. We ask that our future be inscribed, that it be written in heavenly books for life and not for death, for sustenance and not scarcity. We'll read those words tomorrow. This idea says, hey, we're sinners. We deserve the bad things we get. This is the type of thinking that looks at personal and national tragedies as some sort of divine punishment for not being good enough. And we wonder where Jewish guilt comes from. This philosophy is not only destructive, it turns out that the rabbis didn't really believe it either. According to the men who wrote our high holiday liturgy, and yes, it's all men, sorry. According to them, tshuva is not about appeasing a judgmental deity. Our introspection, our atonement, it's not for avoiding sin from a displeased God. If we look closely, like we did at the poem, if we look closely at the climactic prayer in the high holiday liturgy, the unetana tokef, we'll see the truth behind this. At the end of wondering what will become of us, after we've posed the question, who by fire, who by water, we say these words, utshuva, utfila, utstaka, ma'avirin et ro'a hagezera. Through repentance, through prayer and charity, we overturn the evil of the decree. Don't be fooled. Don't be fooled like the poem into thinking we're wiping our slates clean. We are not given a formula to overturn the decree. Listen closely to the words. We can overturn the evil of the decree, and that's all. We can overturn the evil of the decree. That's a very different theology and thought process. Rabbi Alan Liu, in his the best title I've ever heard for the high holidays, he wrote a book called This is Real and You Are Completely Unprepared. I don't know if he wrote it for rabbis and clergy or if he wrote it for everybody. But Rabbi Liu says, he explains what it means to overcome the evil of the decree. He says that the nature of those practices, of any spiritual practices, not just the ones prescribed, but the nature of any spiritual practice, it doesn't change what happens to us. It changes us. Finding a spiritual path will help us experience what happens not as evil, but simply as what happens. We know that we cannot stop or change bad things. We can't stop them from happening. But through spiritual practice, we can change our reaction to those sadder moments, those difficult times. Our spiritual lives and practices can affect the way we take on life's challenges. We live in a time and place when we think that we should be able to follow whatever path we want. Don't tell me what to do. We shouldn't feel an obligation to anyone or anything. But that's just as empty a path. It's a life's philosophy born out of the same denial and rationalization as the man in our poem. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry, I could not travel both. This man had a choice, and while he wanted to take both paths, he couldn't. It's about the path. The central narrative of our people is the story of a journey, of traveling, of a path from slavery to freedom. When the Jews left their bondage and started on their path, they didn't know what they wanted out of life. They didn't know where they wanted to run. They only knew they wanted to run away from Egypt. We're told that that's why God doesn't take them on the most direct route. If you look at a map, it should not have taken 40 years to get from Egypt to the land of Israel. But God did not take them on the most direct route. God avoided taking the children of Israel through the land of the mighty Philistines. God knew that our people would lose heart. At the first sight of something that looked like hard work, they'd want to turn around and run back to their slavery. Because all they knew was what they wanted to run away from. They didn't know how they wanted their lives to look. Now, we may not know exactly what we want out of life, but there are systems that can help us. The mitzvot, the commandments, can help us walk a path with a direction in mind, the direction towards being better people. If we are not better people through our practice of religion, then we're doing it wrong. And that's the other way to look at what it means to be commanded. We can see the road ahead of us as blessings. We can see our obligations, our commandments as a gift. The purpose of these commandments, we can see it is to be better people. The commandments can help us overcome some of our natural instincts and to help us reach our full potential. Well, if that's the case, then the next few days of repentance are done totally differently. It's not just about beating our chests. It's about looking at the commandments as a guide for how to become better. The process of tshuva is not one of cowering and avoiding pain. It's about refinement and growth. It's about returning to who we are. According to the great scholar Maimonides, the sole object of the law of the commandments is to benefit us. According to him, the reason we're given the mitzvot, the commandments, is to establish proper relations, to diminish evil, to train in good manners, and warn against bad habits. That's why we have commandments. It reminds me of a children's book that some of you may have. It's called No Rules for Michael. It's about a boy who wants to live with absolute freedom. He doesn't like any of the rules that are put on him at school or at home. But what he comes to find out is that without rules, his friends won't share, they don't take turns really well, and they actually might end up hurting each other. Like Michael, we're given rules to help refine our behavior. Like Michael, we can derive great benefit from just a little bit of structure. That's what Rabbi Lou was talking about. Spiritual practice and discipline can help us confront the challenges of our journey. So let's go back to that word, that tshuva, to the idea of returning. Return to ourselves, returning to help that which helps us be better. But since each one of us is unique, it means that we all have our distinct path to follow. We don't all live by the same ideas. One day, a student approached the seer of Lublin. Rabbi, he said, show me the way to serve God. The rabbi smiled, in that kind of grandfatherly smile that rabbis often do in the stories. He looked at him and he said, it's impossible to tell people what path they should take. One person's way to best serve God is through study. Another's may be through song. A different person's path may be through prayer, while someone else is through silent contemplation. Some may come to God through fasting, still others eating and drinking. I think that one's the most normative Jewish one. And then he concluded, each person should carefully observe what way their heart pulls, and then choose that way with all the strength of their being. Choose our path. This view of mitzvot, of commandedness, is in line with the story of Reb Zusia. The famous story of a rabbi who said, I'm afraid to die because when I get to the Olam Haba, when I get to the world to come, they won't ask me why I wasn't more like Moses. They'll ask me why I wasn't more like Zusia. Why didn't I live up to my own potential? But fair warning, even this view of the commandments can have a downside. If the sole purpose of mitzvot is to make us better people, then it can lead to a preoccupation with ourselves. If we're so focused on improving ourselves, we can lose sight of those around us. If our conscience is the only thing guiding us, it can lead us to justifying all kinds of things in the pursuit of enlightenment. So we have a path. And the structure and nature of that path of commandments and laws is called halakha. In the past, we've thought of halakha as meaning Jewish law. You've heard that before, I'm sure. Jewish law. But halakha as Jewish law is just something that means that we have punishments for transgressing. We've grossly misinterpreted the meaning of halakha, of that rabbinic system. Unless we view the entire system as a divine ransom, then we have to change our approach. Halakha. The root comes from the word lalechet, to walk. The word is full of a notion of a journey. It means that every time we decide what we're going to do, every time we make a choice, we're deciding what path to take. Mitzvot, commandedness, halakha, they're not about law. It's telling us to take a journey. The rabbis of the ancient past gave us direction and realized that there were a multitude of outcomes, a multiplicity of opinions. They knew that two different ideas and practices could be equally valid. I may need to read that again because of the world we live in. Two different ideas and practices can be equally valid. The Talmud, the foundation of rabbinic law, or rabbinic thought more accurately, the Talmud is replete with questions and conversations, many of which end without answers. It's a path. While we may not feel today the pressure of a vengeful God, though, we do know pressure. We know what it feels to be afraid of expectations. We know what it looks like when our Facebook feed or our Twitter timeline or anything on social media, we look at it and we see all these smiling families of perfectly behaved children and parents, none of whom are yelling or at all messy at anything. And then we return to our own lives. That's pressure. We wonder why we're so imperfect, but we're comparing ourselves to the wrong thing. We wonder if we're doing the right thing for ourselves, for our families, for our children. We wonder if we're involved enough or too much, if we're too strict, overly indulgent, we don't know. And every day there's something coming out telling us, you're doing X all wrong. I promise you, I read recently there is a video online, if you look for it, you're eating a pomegranate all wrong. So how do we know the right way? That's where the word halakha can guide us back to the truth. There are two roads in the forest. At times we choose the one we see others taking, and other times we take the path we think is less traveled. Halakha is a path, but not one built out of the same rationalization and denial as the poem describes. Halakha presents us with a path that we will follow, and it asks us to listen to that still small voice within us. If we practice it correctly, halakha is not about listening to long dead rabbis telling us what to do. It's about tapping into what our conscience says is the right thing. It's about setting out on a path with a destination in mind. We must know where we want to go. We must know the person we want to be. And we have to have support on that journey. We have to count on those people who love us and care about us to help us become better people. Sometimes this actually Sometimes this actually entails asking them if we're doing the right thing. That can be scary. But we can do it. We can choose a path and see if we get there. Don't wander aimlessly and then decide it was the right thing afterwards. That's like shooting blindly and painting a target around where you hit. Choose a path. And this year, let's use our tradition. Let's use the guidelines Judaism provides to help us become better people. Let's use the value of Shabbat, of sanctity, in a way that builds stronger connections to our family and friends. Let's keep kosher. I know that scares you. Let's keep kosher our own way. Let's decide to eat in a way that reflects not only our appetites, but our values as well. Maybe we're more conscious about the way we get our food. We're worried about sustainability. Maybe we're more aware of the way the animals are treated before they wind up on our dinner table. That's using halakha as a guide to reflect our values. So this year, let's meet expectations. Not the expectations of a distant, judgmental God, but the expectations we set for ourselves. Find your own path. Be your Zusia. Return to you. Shana Tova.